Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, and today I wanted to talk about my top 10 favorite Hearthstone decks of all time. This will be both wild and standard. I've played a lot of both in my time in Hearthstone, and I'm going to add a caveat because I have been playing Hearthstone for the better part of a decade, fairly consistently, so I've played a great many decks, and I have liked a lot of them. If I was going to pick just based off of the deck, probably half of the decks I picked would be Warlock. So I'm going to do one deck for each class, my favorite deck of that class, and they will be ranked against each other in top 10. Death Knight hasn't really been around long enough for me to say I have a favorite deck, so it'll be from the other classes. But if I had to pick one, I'd say Reno Blood DK is the most fun I've had playing Death Knight so far. So I actually delete my deck tracker periodically so it doesn't strain my computer too much. So I don't have my personal list from all the way back. I had to do a lot of remembering, and I tried to look up some of these lists, but it's hard to find reliable data for what the competitive versions of these decks were, even when you look at like Tempo Storm and Vicious Syndicate. So basically, I did my best to recall what the decks looked like, and I steered toward versions that I played, not necessarily versions that were the strictly best 30. All right, number 10 is Paladin. I actually struggled a little bit to think of a deck that I could even pick. Doing this has made me realize that Paladin is actually my least favorite class in Hearthstone. It has a lot of decks that really speak to me, like Uther OTK and Wild Libram Paladin, and I have liked some meta decks like Ungoro Murloc Paladin. But as far as like actually loving a Paladin deck, they don't really rank that high for me. There are a lot of cards I really love, like Sunkeeper Tarim is one of my favorite cards ever. I wish that card was more meta and wild right now. Fun fact, this isn't my favorite list, but Paladin was the first deck I actually played in Hearthstone. When I was giving Hearthstone a chance, I looked up like what a good deck is, and the highest rated deck on Hearthstone at the time, this is back in Classic around when the modes version is based on. The most popular deck on Hearthstone was actually Shockedin, which was just like an aggro deck that used Avenging Wrath as the top end. I think I got to rank 7 that season, and it all went up from there. So I can enjoy Paladin. I just wouldn't say that I love a lot of Paladin decks. But this one, after some thought, this was Dude Paladin from Kobolds and Catacombs. So level up actually cost 5 at the time. I think I ran 2 when I played this. This list is from a Strife Co video. It's around what I played, but I can't remember my exact 30. I do think that I ran 2 level ups, and I might have run 2 Vine Cleavers, but I was kind of a greed lord, I guess. But yeah, so this was Dude Paladin before Baku came out. I was really mad at Baku for invalidating this version of the deck. I really liked it. So Sunkeeper Tarim, of course, you can't play in Odd Paladin. But you play Call to Arms. You had the Righteous Protector, Argent Squire, Drygulch Jailer, and Knife Juggler to pull out with that. Steward of Darkshire. And then you got to also run Lightfuse Steganon and Crystal Lion. And it felt like it had endless boards without it being truly endless like it is with Baku. So I did really enjoy this deck. I played a lot of it, and level up getting nerfed for Baku has always made me sad, and I really wish that they would unnerf it. Next up, we have Demon Hunter, and I actually do like a lot of Demon Hunter decks. I really liked Aggro Demon Hunter in early Sunken City. In Darkmoon Faire, the standard Soul Demon Hunter with Il'gynoth as like a alternate OTK. The whole deck's not built around just it. You could just have Il'gynoth for some burst damage in the end. That's Soul Demon Hunter right before they nerfed it. That I really liked. But if I had to pick just one, Ashes Odd Demon Hunter. So this is like after a nerf or 2 to Demon Hunter. Warglaives used to have an additional durability. Metamorphosis used to deal 1 more damage. It was just really fun to see so many weird cards actually see play in Wild. And having a new class come out and actually be really strong in Wild was something I wasn't expecting. And it felt nice. You know, like it was a new class that felt like it was a Wild deck. So I really liked that. It was really cute that everyone was running like Glacial Shards and Frozen Shadow Weavers to tech against the mirror. Even like, you know, Blowtorch Saboteur saw play. So this list was one that I climbed with kind of midway through the expansion, I think. I played a lot of Odd Demon Hunter during Ashes because I was powering to get to the 1K portrait. And over the course of the time, you know, this card was a really popular card in Odd Demon Hunter, but like it felt so bad to me. So I tried cutting cutting it and running Silphid Swarmer instead because you're basically attacking every turn with Odd Demon Hunter, and this was a 3-mana 3/5. So not to say that that was what you should have done, but I really liked running this list. I can't remember if this was before or after it really got to the point where everyone was running 2 Blowtorch Saboteurs and 2 Glacial Shards in literally every Demon Hunter deck for the mirror. But yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia for this deck. It was when I started streaming, so just a lot of really good times. Hunter is, if you'd asked me like yesterday, what is your least favorite class in Hearthstone, I'd probably have to pick Hunter. In general, I don't really think about having a favorite or least favorite class. I more have favorite and least favorite decks, but just Hunter doesn't really have a lot of them that speak to me. It's had a few actually that I really love though. So Hunter basically has 2 modes for me. I cannot play more than a game or 2 with this ever, and I love this deck. So I actually did really like Questline Hunter when that was more playable. I didn't like its existence in the meta, but I did enjoy it when I myself was playing it. Katharina Hunter and Spell Hunter from way back around KNC, those were some of my favorite decks ever. I really enjoyed the Katharina Hunter, and I think part of the reason why I like Questline Hunter so much is because of how much I liked the spell-only Hunter with Rockdalar and To My Side and all that, and the Hunter Spellstone. I played a ton of those 2 decks. I really liked those, and I would have picked one of them, but I think if I'm honest with myself, there is actually one Hunter deck I like even more. And that would be Beast Hunter from the past year, also known as Copper Hunter. This deck draws a bunch of cards, it plays for tempo, it has explosive endgames. You use Harpoon Gun to discount your beasts, you use Buzzard to draw a bunch of beasts, you try to tempo out early, and then if it goes to late game, you can set up these cool Tundra Rhino finishes, sometimes even from max health. This is the Sunken City version, the version that like really got me into it. I think this is a great example of a deck like this, you know, kind of along the lines of like Grim Patron, Dark Lair, where it's not really any one archetype. It's like aggro with combo. It's really versatile, draws a lot of cards, but this never really felt oppressive, and maybe part of that is because nobody could really get into it. I feel like it was dramatically underplayed for its strength, but you could disrupt it, you could out-heal it. The Hunter player had a lot of agency over how the game went, but it wasn't like Dark Lair where if things went the Dark Lair's way, there's nothing your opponent could do about it, you know? So like, I feel like it's in that same category of deck, and Beast Hunter is the ultimate example of a version of that deck that is fine for ladder. But yeah, I can always play this deck. It's really fun. Shaman is another one that I haven't liked that many Shaman decks, but the Shaman decks that I do like, I love. One of the ones I really like was back before Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. It would run Earth Elemental and Faceless Manipulator and Emperor Thorson, and the card that gives your minion Death Rattle, resummon it. So like you get the trigger on it, you'd play Earth Elemental, give the Death Rattle, resummon, and you could play Faceless Manipulator the same turn, copying it, so you get 2 Earth Elementals with Death Rattle, resummon an Elemental at the same time, and that was pretty game ending. It was also extremely janky. So I really loved that deck briefly, and then Gadgetzan came out, and I thought it got some sweet upgrades because we had Wide Eyes come out, and that was pretty cool because the Storm Guardian was really good with that combo too. But that was also the expansion when Dirty Rat came out, and that was always pulling my Faceless Manipulators and making me unhappy. So I stopped playing the deck at that point, but that one does stick out to me as one that I really liked. Ungoro Quest Murloc Shaman is the first time I've ever gotten to Legend with a meme deck. I did that back in Knights of the Frozen Throne. In Wild, I typed Murloc into the search function, put in literally everything that synergized, and just queued it up and got to Legend with that. So I do like that one. I go back and forth on Even Shaman. I really like the version that used to run all of the Jade cards. There are a lot of fun meme decks, like with the Oldham Quest with Jade, that are really fun. So like there's a lot of stuff to do in Shaman, especially nowadays, that I really like, but historically it's been Also for classic mode, when that first came out, I played a mid-range Shaman. That was my first Legend in that mode, and actually like surprised how good Shaman actually was in classic. I think it's probably one of the more underrated things in the history of Hearthstone. But anyways, my favorite has gotta be Shutterwalk Shaman. Shutterwalk is my favorite card in the whole game, more because of Reno Shaman from around the time as this list. This was a Witchwood list that I found on Trump's channel. And I don't know that I ran a list quite like this one, but the important cards are still here. So you had Grumble, you had Zola, and you had Serenite Chaingang and Life Drinker. So you would, the Serenite Chaingang add summon a copy of this minion to the Shutterwalk's pool. Zola and Grumble return the copied one to your hand. And Life Drinker deals 3 damage while healing 3 from you. It's got the infinite Shutterwalk thing going for it, but back then you were running a little Life Drinker Pew Pew. It wasn't like the Alterac version where the Shutterwalk would just get all buff from how old Snowfall Guardian used to work. The freezes were pretty mid, you know, like Glacial Shard was basically your only option. So it just felt like a nice janky combo deck. I really like combo decks when you really have to like work for them and they're a little fragile. So I jammed a lot of this type of thing in standard, but I also had a wild Reno version at the time that I was really enjoying. And that is the one that made me like Lotheb as much as I do. You know, like Darkler and all that has happened since then. So Lotheb, Shutterwalk, my favorite cards. I go back and forth on the order, but you know, Reno, Shutterwalk Shaman, before Zephrys came out and spoiled my infinite, you know, that made me fall in love with those cards. And I really, really enjoyed the standard version of this deck with the Life Drinkers. Playing like 20 Life Drinkers in the turn because of how Grumble and Shutterwalk work. You know, some of the most fun I've ever had in Hearthstone. So then we have Mage, and I think a lot of what I like about Mage has been Reno Mage over the years. I did enjoy Mech Mage back in GVG. That one had the Goblin Blast Mage and Antonidas as the top end, so you had your spare parts that you would save up, and then you would play them alongside Archmage Antonidas to get a bunch of fireballs. I really enjoyed that one. So various Reno Mages over the years, before and after LPG. With and without LPG. I've really liked those. Mage also has some of my most hated decks, so like I really didn't like having Ignite Mage around in Wild. Cyclone Mage and Deck of Lunacy Mage made standard unplayable to me. Like I didn't queue any standard while those decks were around. I tried it, hated the meta, and was not playing standard while those decks were around. So like Mage is pretty polarizing for me. Like they're more iconic decks. I've either like really enjoyed them or absolutely despise them. And then we have one that's kind of the mix of both. My favorite deck for Mage was Rise of Shadows Quest Mage in Wild. The Year of the Dragon, I think, had a lot of stuff going for it that I would have liked, but I was pretty burnt out from going from Boomsday to Rastakhan. I actually fell off pretty hard that year. I played a little bit of Standard from time to time, but most of my Hearthstone experience that whole year was just playing Quest Mage and Wild to Legend. So you might know this from either the Ashes version or the current version with the Parrots and have a bad taste in your mouth about it. You might even know it from this version and hate it, but this is back when it was much jankier and much less meta. So the version of this that got the quest itself nerfed wouldn't be around for almost a full other year. That was after Licensed Adventurer came out, but I'm still running some like really bad cards in here, like Frostbolt Ice Lance. You would just play a bunch of different cards in order to get Mana Cyclone to give you a bunch of garbage and then complete the quest. It only required 6 triggers at the time. And then you would try to kill your opponent with either Arcane Giant, Mana Giant wasn't out yet, or Flamewaker. This deck was so starved for threats that I even tried Mana Addict in there for a while. That's why I have gold of these. It wasn't that bad. I think I maybe landed on just one of them for my final version of the deck. I don't remember. So we got more threats later. We got more consistent activators later. And once everyone else was doing it, the appeal of this deck diminished dramatically. So in Ashes, I really hated this deck. Source's Apprentice wouldn't actually get nerfed to 4 mana until like Night Mage came out, so it cost 2 back then. But during Year of the Dragon, prior to Licensed Adventurer coming out, definitely my favorite deck that year. If I was ranking these decks like without a 1 per class restriction, this would still have to be in my top 5 just because it hard carried my enthusiasm for an entire year. So yeah, I really love this deck. Lots of fun. Fun fact, I saw Shirvala, I think the card is called Shenvala. I crafted this golden when it came out because I was like, oh, that would be good in Quest Mage. And of course it wasn't. And I later pulled a non-golden version and disenchanted the golden one that I crafted. So mistakes were made. Rogue is another one that I have a lot of choices for. I did really enjoy Miracle Rogue back in Classic way back when. I was like just getting into it right before they nerfed it. Odd Rogue from Boomstay I really liked until it and Odd Paladin got old, as 100% of my opponents were playing those decks. Even Odd Rogue more recently back with Nitro Boost Poison, I really enjoyed playing that deck. Tempo Rogue with Keleseth, with Felderai Strider, really like those decks. People talk about Galakron's Rogue really highly, but like I said, I didn't play much back then. I don't think I even tried Galakron Rogue before it got nerfed. Leeching Poison Kingsbane, huge favorite of mine. I really enjoyed that one. That is my example of a card where I am sad that it's nerfed, but I also wouldn't unnerf it. The amount of love I have for a card to the amount of sense I have that this isn't good for the game, you know, that is most epitomized with Leeching Poison. So like I really liked Leeching Poison. That's the one. It used to cost 2 and it would give your weapon lifesteal permanently. So you would put that on the Kingsbane would get bigger and bigger, and then you just be chunking face and healing all the way back to full. I know that Mill Rogue is pretty polarizing. That that's the one with Cold Light Oracle and Shadow Step, and you bounce it over and over again to mill your opponent into fatigue. Obviously, if your deck isn't built to deal with that, it's very frustrating. But as someone who plays the Mill Rogue, that was very fun. I do enjoy playing Mill Rogue when it's not complete utter garbage, you know, like when you can kind of like get away with it. And I think that's more MMR based than meta based, but that is a fun deck. But having to pick one, gotta give it to Darkmoon Faire Kingsbane prior to the printing of Nitro Boost. I was actually somewhat known for playing this deck for a while. This was the time that I had a top 10 finish on all 3 of the servers. So Asia server, EU server, and America server. I finished in top 10 on all 3. Later on, Nitro Boost would come out, and I still loved the deck. I played it a ton of Kingsbane Rogue during the time when this deck was good. So yeah, it was more of a mix of aggro, Rogue and Kingsbane Rogue. It wasn't like the mill lifesteal version that the Leeching Poison was, but like it's a prime example of like the type of aggro deck that I like. It has the early pressure of an aggro deck, but it also doesn't like completely run out of steam after turn 5 and be super top deck boring. You know, it has an early game plan and a late game plan. So I'm much more likely to like an aggro deck if it doesn't just stop functioning as a deck on turn 5. Warrior is an interesting one because there was a time in Hearthstone when I'd have told you that it was my favorite class. I really enjoyed Control Warrior all the way through Frozen Throne, and looking back on it, what I really enjoyed was Fiery War Axe because I promptly stopped enjoying the class as soon as they changed that card. But yeah, so classic Control Warrior, which is really more of Tempo Warrior when you think about it. Otherwise known as Wallet Warrior, just it had all the legendaries in it. Really liked that one. Monkey Warrior with Elise. So you shuffle the map to the Golden Monkey into your deck. When you draw the map, you play that, draws you a card, and shuffles the monkey into your deck. And when you play the monkey, it changes all cards in your hand and deck into legendary minions. So what you would do with this warrior deck is your whole deck would be reactive tools, and then this one win condition. So once you've finally stabilized against your opponent, you play the monkey, and it turns all of your reactive tools into threats. So I really enjoyed that gameplay more in MTG, but this was the first time I got that feeling in Hearthstone of just like pure reactive deck, singular win con. So yeah, I really love that deck. I'm really curious to have Classic update to League of Explorers so that I can try that deck out again, because I would not be surprised if that deck was absolute utter garbage. It's funny looking at Classic. We thought Hunter was good, we thought Shaman was bad, and they are very the opposite. Hunter is terrible and Shaman is very good. So I'm curious to know, like, was Monkey Warrior actually a terrible deck? And I would not be surprised to find out that it was. But that's all to say, I did really enjoy it. There have been various Pirate Warriors that I've really liked. Not Questline Pirate Warriors so much, but like the other ones that, especially the one that ran Fiery War Axe from Frozen Throne and before. And even the Ankar version from Ashes was really fun. Odd Warrior and Control Warrior I really liked. Taunt Warrior from Ungoro, that was a super fun deck. Warrior had a lot of decks that I really liked in the early years of Hearthstone. And it's kind of fallen off as a class for me since then, for the most part. It's not like I can't find a warrior deck that I like, but as far as like the warrior decks that I love, they're all early on. And having to pick just one, post-nerf Patron Warrior. So there's no Warsong Commander in here. It was nerfed already. This was actually my first legend. I never got into the deck while it was more popular with the Warsong Commanders. So the version of the card at the time was 3 mana 2/3. After you summon another minion with 3 or less attack, it gains charge. So that got nerfed to the meme, your charge minions have +1 attack, and it was later like partially reverted or reworked, however you want to call it, to give your minions that you summon rush. So that one worked like a combo. So you would play Emperor Thorson and you would play Grim Patron. The patrons would all get charge. You'd play Inner Rage and Whirlwind, and then they'd go face, and people hated that, so they nerfed it. But it was actually still a fine deck afterwards. Back then, Fiery War Axe still cost 2. Slam actually costs 2 as well. It's been buffed since then. I imagine we'd run 2 of these if it existed this way at the time. And just as a tempo deck, it worked out. You would set up either a Deathbite so that you could do Inner Rage on a Grim Patron on turn 5, and then swing with the second charge of Deathbite to deal 1 to both the Grim Patrons that you just made. So you'd have 4 patrons on 5. They were somewhat sticky because you had to kill them all in one blow, or else there would be more of them. So yeah, it was like a mid-range tempo deck. It was less like a combo deck. If I could do it again, I bet you I would super get into the more chargy version, but I really liked this version. And it's got heavy nostalgia because it was my first legend. Priest is another deck that I really identified with early on in Hearthstone. And by early on, I mean not the first couple years, but maybe after that. So starting around Gadgetzan when Raza came out. I really liked pre-Anduin Reno Priest a lot. So it was more of a value deck. It was like a bad Reno Lock because it was Reno Lock, had all the same like good matchups, but it actually lost to the Reno Locks. So it was like strictly worse Reno Lock. Eventually, people came up with a version where you would run Spawn of Shadows and Sir Finley and Justicar, Trueheart, and Shadow Form and Emperor Thorson to like be able to do 16 damage without, and this is before Anduin still. So just by refreshing your hero power by changing it several times, you were able to trigger Spawn of Shadows 4 times and kill your opponent as Jiraxxus. That was back when Jiraxxus still set health to 15. And that was a problem with the deck, is the priest had no game into Jiraxxus. So you had to run all this like super jank to be able to win that matchup. So I really got into that deck. I really liked Cthulhu Priest. I really liked just N'Zoth Priest. In Kobolds and Catacombs, I really got into Inner Fire. I really liked that version of the deck. I haven't loved Inner Fire since then. Not that I hate it either. I just, back then I really liked it, and now Silence Priest was cute in Ungoro. But having to pick just one, I gotta go with Raza Priest. So this is Turbo Raza in Wild as it existed when there was a standard version of the deck. So Kobolds and Catacombs, Raza Priest would be my favorite. My first legend with this deck was actually in Knights of the Frozen Throne, while Jade Druid was still absurd. So like I had a much jankier version of this that had Bone Drake. So Koldara Drake is the mage card that you can refresh your hero power as many times as you want. So I ran Bone Drake in the deck. Had like dragon synergy, and then I added a Bone Drake to have the random chance of getting Koldara so that I could OTK my opponent from any health total. I had that, like I definitely got to legend before I pulled that off. But after I finally found the Koldara Drake, pulled off the Koldara Drake OTK, I super cut that from the deck. You may remember having pulled this off after we got Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. It was a much better way of finding Koldara Drake, but this was back before that card was around, so you had to do it all weird style. So yeah, this is Turbo Raza Anduin. Raza sets your hero power to 0, and Anduin, its hero power becomes deal 2 damage, and after you play a card, refresh this. So cards were generally worse back then. You ran a lot of draw, there was no pull celts, so you were just trying to find Anduin and Raza first before your opponent played their Anduin and Raza. For the standard version of the time, they were using Velen and Mind Blast, but the wild version had Spawn of Shadows. You're probably tired of this card by now, but at the time it was super novel to me that a card this bad was actually a real meta contender that wasn't just a cheeky Jiraxis counter. So yeah, this card seeing meta play was really fun to me. I never super got into the full Sarad Confessor Paletrist meme, but Recruiter is my favorite like pet card for Raza Priest. So you basically deal like about 14 damage with this card if all conditions were correct, but it gave you a lot of tempo and a lot of board control. So like if your Anduin and your Raza were already online, it was a really good like way to take back the board and get a bunch of pings in. What I liked about it is it gave me a way to whittle away at like Druid armor, for example, before my spawn turn a little bit later. I am not telling you that this card was good to play, but I had success with it and I thought it was really fun. So I definitely played it. But yeah, so like I have a lot of nostalgia for Raza around this time. It was a cool deck and I still enjoy the deck today. So picking a version, this version is definitely my favorite, but I didn't really play it in Ashes because Polkelt took some of the fun out of it. It was a little too consistent. And then fast forward to Barons, I got over it and really enjoyed it in Barons. I held rank 1 for like half a month with the Barons version of Raza Priest. That was really fun. Played a lot of the Shadow Renathal version in Nathria. That was really fun. That's more of a Reno Priest than a Raza Priest, but the difference for me is for this version, if you didn't have to play it Highlander, you probably wouldn't. It's not really a Reno deck. It's about Raza, not about Reno. Whereas the Renathal version Shadow Priest from Nathria is about being Highlander. You're not really running it to strictly get out Raza and Anduin. You have those because they're good cards, but it's more of like an outvalue, survive, grind your opponent Highlander deck. So that's the difference to me. So like this is more of a Raza Priest. That's what I like. Whereas the Reno Priest, still fun, but I would call them different names because I'm weird. So, so yeah, really like this deck. Probably my favorite Highlander deck ever, and definitely one of my favorite decks of all time. Next up, we have Druid. And you know what's funny about Druid? Right before streaming, this was before they had that little neat little snapshot of your most played classes. My wife and I sat down and we guessed what my win total was for each class. Then all you have to do is populate a deck and go to the play screen to see how many. And we put in our guesses for what my most and least played class were, or like where all of the classes ranked as far as like what my most wins were, what my least wins were. And my guess for my least played class was actually Druid. Then we looked at the list and it was my second most. My most played has been Warlock ever since I picked it up. Was my first one to gold, and it just like keeps having good decks. I keep playing it. It keeps having decks that I like. So if I had to pick a favorite class, it'd be Warlock. But yeah, my second most played class was actually Druid when I thought it was my least played. I was like, why why is that my most played class? And I think it's because of Togwaggle. So King Togwaggle, swap decks with your opponent, give them a ransom. Aviana used to cost 9, and that's important. And then your minions cost 1. Then you had Azalina, replace your hand with a copy of your opponent's, and Kun the Forgotten King. Choose one, gain 10 armor, or refresh your mana crystals. They came out with Juicy Psych Melon in Boomsday. And what you would do is you play Juicy Psych Melon and then you draw all 4 of those cards. It was really funny because all those cards existed before, and then they printed this, and I was like, wait, that just tutors the combo. What are you doing? you would play Aviana, and then you play Kun with your 1 mana left over to refresh your mana crystals. You'd play Togwaggle, swapping decks with your opponent and giving them the card that lets you swap back. And then you'd play Azalina, which gives a copy of your opponent's hand. So now you have the deck swap back card. So if your opponent swaps, you just swap right back, and then you've swapped permanently. Then the rest of your deck is draw and reactive stuff. So not stuff that wins the game, but stuff that keeps you in the game. And you trade that for your opponent's cards that win the game. And they're closer to fatigue than you are because you've drawn so many cards. I love that deck. I played so much of it. I did play some Druid and Classic, and in between those two, I can't really remember much Druiding. So I guess like just right up until Rostcon, I played a ton of Druid. It's just baffling to me because like I don't remember playing it much at all in between. I did like Taunt Druid with Hadronox. I did play a fair bit of that. I wasn't really a Starliner fan. That kind of took the fun out of it for me. I did play some Spiteful Druid when that was popular, but like I didn't really love it or anything. Fast forward, you might be surprised to hear me saying that I didn't think that I played much Druid because I play a ton of Druid nowadays. I really liked Dragon Druid in Sunken City. I liked Reno Druid in Sunken City and Nathria. There are all kinds of fun Druid decks for me to play now because the core is so strong. You can just kind of put whatever you want as your finisher and get away with it. I did play a fair bit of Jade Druid when that was popular, but not in Knights of the Frozen Throne when it was at its best. I played it like in Mean Streets and in Angoro. In Knights, there were too many mirror matches and it was boring. And there were a lot of other fun things that I've mentioned before that I was more interested in trying. But having to pick just one, Cthulhu Druid. It's all reactive tools, and then you have your one Cthulhu win condition. What's really cool about it is it's unratable. So your Cthulhu splits into a bunch of pieces, and then you have to play them all to assemble your Cthulhu and then finish off your opponent once it's safe to actually put the pieces together. And there are a lot of reasons I love this deck. Number one is playstyle. I love the playstyle of it. The sit back and control for a long period of time. The word control gets misused a lot in Hearthstone, I feel like. You know, not everything that's slow and that has large cards in it is a control deck. Some decks are just kind of greedy. Some decks are tempo with a high top end. But this is a control deck, so like it's completely reactive, and then it has a singular win con at the end. So like I really enjoy this playstyle, and the card itself looks like a meme card, right? When Darkmoon Faire was announced, this was the card I was most excited to play. I knew immediately I was going to craft it golden. I like the design of it because you have to like play through your whole deck, find the pieces, and then you get a cool, exciting thing. Like that just concept of your deck as a quest to assemble something without it being like the top-down quest at the beginning. That's really cool to me. So everything about this card is really fun. And when I saw it, I knew it was a meme and I was just going to have fun with it. But it became a good thing because of me. So like this is the one time where I've made an archetype and it's become popular. So for that alone, I have to love this deck, right? But it checks every single box I can think of as far as like the style of gameplay, the fun, the theme. I love Cthulhu Druid, so that's cool. It would later get like optimized. You know, people are added Gloop and Twig Sphere, and it would get more stuff later on. And then it would become obsolete because, while I personally think that it was a lot better into aggro than Linecracker, it couldn't win that matchup. So like Linecracker was Cthulhu Druid that always beat Cthulhu Druid, kind of like how Reno Priest in Gadget Sand was Reno Lock that couldn't beat Reno Lock. So it fell off, it came back. It's pretty good right now. But yeah, I had a lot of fun jamming these games, and like I said, you know, hard not to love an archetype that you popularized with a card that you think is as cool as I think Cthulhu is. And finally, we have Warlock. I think if I was judging these decks based off of the decks alone and not trying to have a deck of each class, you know, a good chunk of my top 10 would be Warlock decks. Warlock has had a ton of decks that I've loved over the years. So after I stopped playing Shakanin and started playing other decks, Zoo Warlock in Classic was one that I really got into. So I really enjoyed that. Reno Warlock from League of Explorers, easily one of my favorite decks of all time. It was like reasonable greed. So it was control-y deck with fun top-end cards and the early game anti-aggro stuff to be able to make that happen. I think the people who like frown on Reno Lock as an archetype, obviously Reno Lock has a reputation as being a pretty intellectual deck. And then the counter argument is you look at the data and the skill cap of the deck doesn't improve as you go up. So like you know, like Reno decks in general are like when you actually look at the data, it doesn't look like they're as smart as some people who really enjoy Reno decks think they are. And there's a lot of validity to that. I do think that the cerebral aspect of Reno decks in general is highly overrated. But the matches that make you feel that way for Reno Lock are much more mirrors than anything else. So when you're up against other greedy decks with a deck like that, that's when the skill of the deck actually starts to really show up, or at least how you feel about it. When most of your opponents are aggro and it just comes down to like, did I keep them off me for a little bit and then slap down Reno? Yeah, there's not much skill expression for either player in those situations. But the Reno enabled you to have the fun back and forth games with a deck like this that you wanted. It did make some games feel a little silly, but you weren't playing the deck for those silly games. You were playing it for like the mirrors, wherein the Reno is a lot less relevant. And the inconsistency of a Highlander deck is less relevant because both of you are playing most of your deck. So even though you're less likely to see a specific card at a specific time, you're playing so much of your deck that there's a consistency because you're playing all of the cards that you have, if you know what I mean. So all I'm saying is, like, those are the games you were playing for. Those are the games that made you feel like Reno Lock was a smart person deck. And not saying whether or not it was, I really enjoyed those games. So like Reno Lock, easily one of my favorite decks of all time. Several iterations of it, but definitely the first one, League of Explorers Reno Lock, easily my favorite of the Reno Lock decks. But Cube Warlock, standard and wild, back when that was around. So you're running Skull of the Minari to cheat demons out of your hand. In wild, you were also running Void Caller, so you got that redundancy. And then you would play Carnivorous Cube, 5 mana, destroy one of your minions, Death Rattle, summon 2 copies of it. So you get a big demon at the beginning of your turn with Minari, and then you play Cube on it, and then you would destroy the Cube with your 1-cost spell that healed for 8 and destroyed one of your own minions. And you'd summon a bunch of Doom Guards, and then later you'd play Shadow Reaper Gul'dan and summon even more Doom Guards. It was so fun. I loved that deck, especially the wild version, but both of them. Really fun. I did like Naga Sea Witch Warlock. So this card used to cost 5. And what you would do is on 5, you would play it, and then you'd play a bunch of giants because they would have their cost set to 5. And then if you'd taken 5 damage, Molten Giant was free. If you had 5 cards in your hand, Mountain Giant was free. So you would just play this and dump all the giants out of your hand. Like, we were seeing Clockwork Giant and Sea Giant getting played in these decks because of how silly Naga Sea Witch was with it. They changed it, I forget exactly when. It used to work the opposite way around. Like, Mountain Giant would decrease its cost and then it would set it to 5. But then they changed it to work the other way a couple expansions later. Maybe it was around Ungoro or Knights of the Frozen Throne. I forget, honestly. But so that deck was fun. I wouldn't say it's my favorite ever, but I did really like it. This is so tough to pick because, like, I really like so many Warlock decks. And part of what's coming down to my actual choice is perspective. Because if I look at what Warlock deck did I have the most fun with ever, I think I have to give it to Darkglare Warlock. I know that Darkglare Warlock has a lot of stigma because it was very oppressive, especially when it first came out, but still for like until it finally got nerfed in Stormwind into like unplayability. But from the Darkglare side of it, kind of along the lines of Rise of Shadows Quest Mage, it was just like such a new Hearthstone experience. You got to play so many cards. You had so much control over how the game went. You were damaging yourself, playing 1,000 cards a turn, and you could really feel like when you lost, it was your own fault. So like just the first couple weeks of learning Darkglare, I think might have been some of the most fun I've ever had in Wild. At the time, my stream was a viewer deck stream, and I really stressed out about having non-viewer deck streams because I was really worried about the success of my stream. I don't think I was partner yet, and I felt like the viewer decks were really important to my viewership at the time. So I rarely didn't play viewer decks. And this, overcoming that anxiety to play Darkglare several days of the week when this was coming out. So maybe that sentiment means more to me than it does to you. But for me to actually say, no, I'm not going to do viewer decks today, and then the next day come around and be like, no, I'm not going to play viewer decks today because I had to play this, it should tell you how much fun I was having. So just because I like something doesn't mean I don't think it should be nerfed. I definitely called for Darkglare nerfs all along the way as long as it was out, but just because I want something nerfed doesn't mean I think it's really fun. It's easily some of the most fun I've ever had playing Hearthstone. The problem with it is once you get used to Darkglare, if your opponent isn't running very specific things that are good into it, they are incapable of having fun. So it heavily restricts the variety of Hearthstone, at least the versions of this that were meta, that you could play, which I think is a net negative for Hearthstone as a game. It was worth nerfing. But as someone who played the deck a lot, I had probably more fun playing this deck than I've had playing any deck in the history of Hearthstone. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is there is a deck that made me love Hearthstone, that no matter how many times I come back to it, I still enjoy it, even though I've played it so many times. It defines why I like Warlock, I guess. And that would be classic handlock. So I got into Hearthstone playing Shaman just to give it a test, decided I liked it. Started playing some Zoo Warlock, and Hand Warlock is what took me from this game's kind of fun to I love this game. I'm still playing Hearthstone today largely because of the fun I had playing Hand Warlock way back in the day. It's another one of those decks where like you kind of think it's a control deck, and it is a little bit, but it's really a tempo deck, kind of mid-rangey tempo, control-y, whatever kind of deck. You tap for a couple turns, get out your Mountain Giants, you take a bunch of damage, and your Molten Giant is eventually free. You give it Taunt with Defender of Argus and Sun-Fri Protector. Taunt actually mattered back then, if you could do that and actually live against aggro a lot of the time. But you could also just tempo out your Ancient. You could coin Ancient Watcher on 2, and then follow it up with, this cost 2 at the time, Iron Begowl to silence it and go face. Soulfire cost 0, so you had a bunch of burst potential. You had Leroy, who cost 4 at the time. You could give it a Power Overwhelming. So now we're sitting at 10 attack, and Faceless Manipulator on 10, the Leroy that has a Power Overwhelming on it. You got 20 damage right there. If you have any Soulfires, they cost 0 at the time left over, you could get 4 to 8 additional damage off of that. If you had your coin, you could do both Power Overwhelming. So like the max burst potential was actually pretty large. This is the damage combo that's referenced in the Leroy pasta, although it was probably more nerfed for Miracle Rogue than it was for Handlock. But yeah, so I got into Handlock, and this is the first deck that I would say I actually loved, and it hasn't gone away. Every time I queue up Classic, I try to play something that isn't Handlock, I don't have fun, and then I switch to this, and I'm like, yeah, that's the stuff. So I used to play with Lord Jiraxis and Ragnaros, and I think Alexstrasza too, but I can't remember what slot that was in. I think I went back and forth on whether or not I ran Shadowflame. So I ran it real greedy back in the day. But it's so cool. Like, still one of the most fun moments I have in Hearthstone is playing Sylvanas and using Power Overwhelming on it so that it dies at the end of the turn to steal something cool from my opponent. So yeah, this has a ton of elements to it that I really like, and you can play this in Classic. It's really fun. I would not run this version. So Lord Jiraxis is bait. You probably want to double up on your Faceless Manipulator instead. It was the first like hero card, so they changed it to a hero card. It used to set your health to 15 as a battle cry and become Jiraxis. So it was like, what I liked about it is having experienced master heroes in WoW TCG, which is like the hero cards in this, but themed for that game. I felt like this was such a cute way of finagling that into the game mechanically. You know, it wasn't its own card type. It was like battle cry, you become Jiraxis. I thought it was just a really cute way of making like hero cards work. From that respect, I'm a little sad that they changed it to be a hero card, but I do like that it's somewhat playable as it is. So yeah, favorite deck of all time. I gotta give it to Handlock, and the competition is extremely heavy. I loved a lot of Warlock decks. So yeah, that was my top 10 favorite decks of all time. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know what your favorite decks of all time are, what you thought of my picks, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching.